Hey there, welcome back to another video. This time around, it is my review of the 1974 film Dark Star. Now, Dark Star is one of those movies that I've been curious about seeing for many, many years, but not curious enough to make it a must-see. It's one of those things where I was curious about it because it is technically the first film that has John Carpenter as the director. It is also a movie that has a cult following, so to speak. And I do remember reading some reviews over the years that made it into something that was a movie that definitely had potential, despite its low budget. But after watching this movie, I don't understand the cult following, and I definitely don't get critics who say that this is particularly that funny, let alone funnier than something like Spaceballs. This is a movie that was an absolute chore to sit through for me. I'm not going to say that this is a rant because it's not really much of a film. There's not much to really rant about because, in a lot of ways, this wasn't really intended to be a feature film, and it really shows. This is a movie that started its genesis as a student film by Dan O'Bannon and John Carpenter for their film school. That's what it was. It was a student film. It was not intended to be a theatrical feature. It wasn't until some investors saw the student film and were impressed with it that the movie wound up getting more money and wound up getting more of a budget and was then considered for a feature film. But even at that point, this is a movie that started out as a student film, was shot and finished and completed as a student film. Then people saw the student film and then were like, hey, we like that. Here's some more money to do more with this. And they did that, but then it still wasn't enough. So the film was in production for like 3 or 4 years. The student film was done in like 1970, and then the extra footage was done like a year or two later, and then they got more money even after that to do more scenes, and that's what led to the version of the film that is available on Blu-ray or DVD today. And I don't understand why any investor saw the student film and was like, oh, this is going to be a hit. We got to give all this money. We got to give more money to try to turn this into a movie. I don't really understand. I don't get what they thought was there. Especially when it comes to being a hit for mainstream audiences or big enough of a hit to really make that much of a profit. A good amount of the humor, a good amount of the things in this are very over a lot of mainstream audiences' heads. And it's just one of those things where I just don't understand why they saw so much in the student film. I don't understand why they saw so much in this concept or this film to begin with. But people did, so that's what led to the version of Dark Star that exists today. Now, the film is directed by John Carpenter, where I have seen some sources that have said that John Carpenter wasn't the main director or he wasn't the only director. I've seen people say that Dan O'Bannon also directed it. So I don't know who directed the majority of what or the majority of certain scenes, but Carpenter is the one that's listed as the main director on IMDb and other sources, so I'm going to stick with that. And John Carpenter is one of the best filmmakers that has ever worked in the realm of cinema. But you don't always start off with a bang. And Carpenter is a good example of this. For his first film, it's not really that impressive. It seems like something that is on par with a lot of other promising filmmakers and their decent enough directorial debuts with their short films. It doesn't really seem to be, from what I've seen, a directorial debut that is incredible. That is something that makes you go, wow, this guy is really something else. No, it just seems like your average, just kind of so decent enough directorial output from a fledgling filmmaker. There are some good looking shots here at times, but there's other shots where things look less than impressive. And the really low budget really does show. I will say this, I think in large part the reason why the direction probably doesn't stand out as much is because this isn't a horror film. It's an attempt to be a sci-fi version of Doctor Strangelove mixed with maybe a little bit of Monty Python and uh, trying to be a parody of 2001: A Space Odyssey. That's what you have here with Dark Star, and that's not really Carpenter's best wheelhouse. You could tell because in 1976 he did Assault on Precinct 13, and his direction in that seems a million times better than what's in this movie. And I think you really have to look at that as one of those things where Carpenter is just better at doing suspense or action than he is at doing comedy. And it's very evident here because there is a sequence that is fairly suspenseful with an elevator and an alien. And despite the alien being a beach ball, the scene is actually genuinely suspenseful because it has some good tension. And that's because Carpenter is really good at that. And he was good at that even this early in his career. But when it comes to other scenes that are trying to be more comical, trying to be more campy, trying to be more intellectual, it's not nearly as effective or as efficient. When it comes to the shot selection, when it comes to the movement of the camera or the energy, it's just one of those films where the direction is fine, but it really shines in the few moments when it deals with elements that Carpenter would go on to be really successful with later on in his career. Now, the film also features a script by Dan O'Bannon, and I think I don't know if Carpenter, yeah, Carpenter also helped with the script as well. And for a film that's listed as like a far out space odyssey, or I've seen as one of the posters actually mentioned that it was an epic, and I'm like, it's an epic in only the mind of Dan O'Bannon because it definitely wasn't an epic in the mind of critics and audiences when it came out. Uh, and rightfully so, unless you're talking about an epic failure, because a lot of people were just wondering how the hell this half-baked student film wound up in theaters. And it's one of those movies where the concept of it is kind of interesting. You have this crew of spacefarers, these guys who are tasked with blowing up things with these bombs that are programmed to kind of, in some ways, think for themselves, which is interesting. A sentient bomb, and this crew, they're stir crazy. They've been holed up and stuck in these spaceships for years, and they're starting to go a little wonky, a little wacky in the head, and doesn't help either that they are constantly in these cramped quarters and cramped environments. And there's attempts at humor involving this alien that's made out of a beach ball, which it looks like this. That's really that's really exactly what the alien looks like. So you could tell it's a beach ball. And I remember when I first heard that, I thought that could be funny. But when you see it in the film, it's not really something that is, for the most part, played as it's a joke. It's played fairly straight with this alien. The most silly aspect of it, or the most comedic aspect of it, is the fact that, oh, the alien's only there because Pinback, one of these characters, he wanted the ship to have a mascot, so he took this alien and decided to keep it. And yeah, you have this beach ball alien. You think that'd be funny, but it's not really. It's more lame than anything. Then you have other attempts to try to be fun in terms of some of the silly antics on the crew, but it just comes across as more lame or just kind of confusing. And you've got a lot of attempts of the writing to try to make it really feel like it's a deeper film than it really is, where it's trying to be like Doctor Strangelove near the end. And some of that is kind of intriguing, but I don't really feel it's executed the best. And it's just a film that's hard to really take seriously when it comes to it trying to be serious and dramatic when it has no money to work with and you have scenes with a beach ball alien. So that causes problems with the tone. I don't think the writing for the characters is really the best either, because other than Pinback, it's hard to really differentiate a lot of the other crew members. Sometimes you get them confused, and then other times you kind of forget that they're even there because there's really not much to these other characters. And they're not given a lot of depth, they're not given a lot to do. And it does feel like a film that's filled with a lot of filler in order to stretch it out to feature length. The attempts to be suspenseful sometimes work, like when the bomb starts thinking for itself and is going to detonate, and they have to try to think of a way to convince it to not do that. And there's also that scene in the elevator. There's other moments that are kind of fun, like the bit where one of the crew members goes in and talks to their commander who is frozen in ice. And there's a couple moments in that scene that made me smirk a little because he's been frozen in ice for so long that he's starting to lose his mind, and so it takes a while for them to get any information out of him. But there's just a lot of stuff here that is just pretty bland and pretty boring. And even stuff that could maybe be interesting, they don't really go that far with. Like with this whole concept, this whole reveal that Pinback was this janitor of some sorts who just got trapped on the ship, and then he decided to take on the role of Pinback. And over the years, no one has really noticed, and that's causing him to kind of lose his sanity. And he goes in and does these video chats, these vlogs, kind of prior to vlogs being a thing. And he talks about what's on his mind and stuff like that. And you watch the vlogs and you see how his mindset changes progressively from each vlog to the next, and you see his slow descent into madness. And I like the fact that there are some bits of satire where you will have the company that's responsible for these vlogs and for this whole mission. They will censor what they consider to be controversial or offensive words or gestures, which that was definitely way ahead of its time. Because you see that happen on a lot of different platforms nowadays, including YouTube. You see sometimes where people will get their entire stream shut down because they're saying too many swear words or doing something that's too offensive and goes against the community guidelines. Um, but yeah, I mean, there's some interesting ideas. There's some okay elements, but none of it really comes together to a very satisfying whole when it comes to this screenplay. At least not for me personally. I really do not understand why you have reviews like this. I don't think I laughed as uncontrollably and as often as during a movie since I was a kid. It is so suspenseful and so terrifying, yet so funny that you end up getting sick from laughing. I give this movie 5 spoons. Some guy named Jack Margolis from the Los Angeles Free Press. That must have been like the only really positive review they were able to find for this film from back in the day, because I I didn't laugh really once. I smirked a few times, but this movie didn't make me laugh. And I know comedy is subjective and everything, but I like to know where the comedy is. Like, where are the jokes? Just because weird stuff happens, that doesn't mean that it's a joke, and it doesn't mean that there's comedic writing going on. Um, the film also features a cast that is full of a lot of people who worked on the short film, which makes sense. I mean, it makes sense that you have a lot of people working in this movie when it comes to the performers that are the people that were involved with the student film, and then that carried over into the feature length film when they tried to, where they made their attempt to turn the student film into a feature film. So, you got Brian Narelle, who plays Lieutenant Doolittle. You got Dan O'Bannon, who's one of the writers, as Sergeant Pinback. You got Cal Kuniholm as Boiler. You got Andreijah Pahich as Talby. You got John Carpenter, who voices Talby. You've got John Carpenter, who voices Commander Powell's voice. Joe Saunders plays Commander Powell, the guy in ice. Nick Castle, I guess, is the alien in this. So he's in the beach ball, or he controls the beach ball. I guess it's one of those things. The performances are nothing special. I would say Dan O'Bannon is the one that delivers like the best performance. It's kind of a proto Jeff Goldblum kind of performance, what Jeff Goldblum would be known for in terms of his nerdy style of acting. And there's a couple other performers that were just kind of there, I guess. I wouldn't say these performers were particularly terrible in terms of their acting, but very flat. I will say that a lot of flat performances. That's why Dan O'Bannon stands out the most, because his character has the most personality, and Dan O'Bannon himself has the most charisma out of anyone in the cast. And the film also features cinematography by Douglas Knapp. It's edited by Dan O'Bannon. And when it comes to the technical aspects of Dark Star, they're they're typical for a very low budget production. I wouldn't say they were really that impressive, but then again, they weren't particularly god awful either. The score is by John Carpenter, and this is not one of his more memorable scores. This is another instance of, well, you don't always start off with your A game, and this is a good example of that. The music in this is kind of standard, kind of rote, kind of just there. There's a couple moments with the score that kind of echo what Carpenter would do later on in his career, but not to the same extent or to the same overall efficiency. And there's this country song that's used rather prominently in the movie called Benson, Arizona. I don't understand. Benson, Arizona, do 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 do. And I'm like, okay, this is probably another attempt to try to add some personality to this movie and some quirkiness, but it just comes across as just random, and it doesn't really fit. But yeah, the film has like a budget of $60,000, and it didn't have a budget of 60,000 to begin with, which is why a lot of the student film scenes are drastically cheaper looking than anything else in the movie. I just don't understand the thought process. You're going to take a student film that had a budget of next to nothing, then you're going to give them more money, but you're not going to have them remake the entire movie. You're just going to have them do new scenes and then put them together. And it's like, why did you think that was a good plan? Like, the entire movie seems like it's just a slipshod, shoddy cut and paste job as a result, because there's a lot of moments you're like, well, that actually looks pretty decent for the low budget. And then you see other scenes where you're like, that looks like straight up garbage. And then you're like, well, that's because they didn't have any money and it was a student film and they didn't have $60,000 to work with for those scenes. So it's just one of those things. It's like, why? Why? It just felt like a waste of money and a waste of investors' time because they didn't really get any money back from it. As the movie bombed. Maybe they wound up getting some money later on because of its cult following. I mean, the movie was so bad it wound up getting into the public domain after a certain amount of time. And it was just released constantly on all these other different formats by all these other different companies for dirt cheap. Until VCI and Dan O'Bannon got together to do the Hyperdrive edition. And I'm like, oh, there's all these movies out there that get bare bones releases and don't get anything close to this kind of treatment. And this has like a feature length documentary on it and a bunch of interviews and all these other features. And I'm just like, I don't get it. I don't understand the cult following for this movie. It's not a rant because I can't really be too harsh on it because it's a student film that should have remained a student film, but they duped some investors into giving them money to do more scenes. But it's still a rather lame, lackluster affair that's more like a dull star than anything else. And it definitely does stand to me personally as Carpenter's worst film. He would only go up from here. I mean, even something like Memoirs of an Invisible Man, I think, is way better than this. Or even The Ward. As generic as that movie is, I would rather watch that than Dark Star. But yeah, that's my thoughts on Dark Star. And until next time, as always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you later. See ya.